The morning light leaked through the cracked window of the small-town garage, cutting through a haze of motor oil and quiet determination. Ethan wiped his hands on a faded rag and looked at the clock. Already past 9. Another day fixing engines for people who could barely afford him, another day wondering if he'd ever climb out of the hole life had dug for him. His mother's medication cost more than his rent, but he didn't complain. He believed in work, in doing right, even when no one noticed. He found comfort in the rhythm of tools and the hum of machines that always made sense, unlike people. The sound of tires crunching on gravel made him look up. A sleek black car rolled into the lot, completely out of place among the dusty trucks and old sedans. The car stopped, engine sputtering, steam hissing from beneath the hood. A woman stepped out, dressed in tailored clothes that spoke of another world. Claire's expression was calm but strained, her eyes searching, uncertain. She looked like someone used to control, now stripped of it by circumstance. Ethan approached, cautious but kind, and asked if she needed help. She nodded, saying she was just passing through and her husband couldn't come to get her. Her voice cracked when she said it, barely noticeable but there. He opened the hood and got to work. The problem was small, a clogged fuel filter, but he took his time. She stood nearby, watching him, the rain beginning to fall, soft at first and then heavier. She looked uncomfortable in her expensive shoes, but didn't complain. He told her she could wait inside. She said she preferred the rain. He smiled, said nothing more. When he finished, he wiped his hands and told her the car was fine. She reached for her purse, but he shook his head. "No charge," he said, almost embarrassed. She blinked, surprised. People in her world didn't refuse payment. She asked why, and he shrugged. "You looked like you needed someone to help without wanting anything back." Something in her face softened. She admitted quietly that her husband usually took care of these things, but lately he'd been distant. Ethan only nodded. He knew loneliness when he saw it. They stood in silence, rain filling the gap between them. She told him her name, Claire. He introduced himself and joked about how her car was worth more than his whole garage. She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. He offered her coffee, from a chipped mug. She accepted, holding it like something fragile. They talked while the rain eased. She told him about traveling for her husband's business, the charity events, the expectations that came with being a certain kind of woman. He listened, not to impress, but to understand. She asked about him, and he told her about his mother, how she raised him alone, how he never left town because someone had to stay and fix what broke. "You fix things," she said softly, almost to herself. "That's rare." He didn't know what to say to that. When the rain stopped, she placed the empty mug on his workbench and thanked him again. She tried one last time to pay him, even left a business card on the counter, but he refused. "If you really want to pay me back," he said, "just don't drive through puddles that deep next time." She smiled for real then, the kind of smile that made him forget how tired he was. As she turned to leave, she said he was a good man. He didn't believe it, but it stayed with him. Her car started smoothly now, purring like it had never broken down. She waved through the window before pulling away, her reflection vanishing in the glass. Ethan stood there for a while, watching the road long after she disappeared. He told himself it was just another job, another stranger passing through. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something about her, about the look in her eyes, had settled inside him like a question he didn't know how to answer. That night, he closed the shop later than usual. The rain had stopped completely, leaving the air cool and clean. He thought about the life she must return to, dinners under chandeliers, cars that never needed fixing, promises that probably sounded hollow by now. He thought about his own world, oil stains, bills, and the quiet hum of engines that never lied. For reasons he couldn't explain, those two worlds had brushed against each other for a moment, and it felt like something had shifted. He cleaned his tools, locked the door, and stood in the dark, listening to the wind. There was nothing magical about it, nothing cinematic. Just two people whose paths crossed when they needed it most. Yet when he closed his eyes, he saw her standing in the rain again, her hand brushing her hair from her face, her voice soft when she said, "Thank you." He didn't know her story, didn't know she would come back, but part of him hoped she would. Because for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt since his father left, since his dreams faded behind obligation. He felt seen. And though he would never admit it, that was enough to keep him waiting. A week later, Ethan was adjusting a carburetor when he saw the same black car outside his garage. His first thought was that something was wrong with his repair, but when Claire stepped out, her expression said otherwise. She smiled faintly, holding 2 coffees, and said she was in the area. He knew that wasn't true. People like her didn't end up in the area by accident. She handed him the coffee and leaned against the car while he finished his work. Conversation came easier this time, small things about weather, music, childhood places that felt safe. Beneath every word was something unsaid, something fragile. She looked less polished than before, as if she'd stopped caring about appearances for a day. He noticed but didn't mention it. When he asked about her husband, she hesitated, then said things at home weren't good. He didn't pry, but her silence spoke louder than anything. He offered her the old chair in the corner, the one his mother used when she came by. She sat there for a long time, watching him work like she needed to be near someone who didn't expect anything from her. The coffee cooled between them, forgotten. When he finally looked up, she asked, almost out of nowhere, what it felt like to be free. He said freedom was overrated when you didn't have anyone to share it with. She looked at him, eyes soft, as if that answer hit deeper than she expected. The next day she came again, pretending the car made a strange sound. He checked it, found nothing, but didn't call her out. They talked instead. She told him she'd discovered her husband was unfaithful. He'd been traveling with another woman, someone younger. The way she said it, without anger, just quiet defeat, made Ethan ache for her. He told her some men don't know the worth of what they have. She smiled bitterly and said, neither do some women. That silence after was heavy, but not uncomfortable. She told him she hadn't told anyone else, not even her friends. He said secrets are heavy things, and she nodded, saying it felt lighter around him. Days turned into weeks. She stopped pretending the car needed repairs and came just to talk. They shared lunches, laughter that surprised them both. She asked about his mother and he told her about the illness, the nights he stayed up making sure she breathed easily. Claire listened like it mattered, like no one had ever asked him to keep talking. In return, she confessed she'd stopped recognizing herself in her own house. It's like living someone else's life, she whispered. He told her she deserved peace. She asked what peace looked like for him. A quiet garage, an honest day's work, someone who doesn't leave, he said simply. She didn't respond, but her eyes glistened. It rained again one afternoon, steady and cold. She stood near the open door while he worked. She asked if he ever regretted staying in this small town. He said no. Everything real in his life happened here. She said she envied that certainty. He asked if she loved her husband. She didn't answer right away, just looked out at the rain. Then she said, I used to. He could hear the exhaustion in her voice, the kind that comes from years of pretending. When she turned back to him, her eyes lingered longer than before. He felt the air change, something charged, dangerous, but he didn't move. She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume mixed with rain. He wanted to reach out, to tell her she wasn't alone, but he couldn't. Not yet. She left before sunset, saying she'd call next time she was passing through. He stood there long after her car disappeared, feeling the same strange emptiness as before but stronger. That night, he thought about her husband, about betrayal and loneliness, and wondered where kindness ends and temptation begins. The line felt thinner every day. He told himself she was just a customer, but that was a lie, and he knew it. There was something about the way she looked at him that made him feel seen in a way no one ever had. The next time she came, she brought food and told him her husband was away for weeks. They ate quietly in the office, laughter breaking through the silence here and there. He realized how easily she fit into his small world, how natural it felt to have her there. Yet every time her phone buzzed, she looked at it like it was something sharp. When she said she hated who she'd become, he told her she was still capable of starting over. She looked at him and said softly, "You make it sound simple." He said maybe it was if she really wanted it. She smiled, a sad, fleeting thing, and asked, "And what if I don't know what I want anymore?" He didn't answer because he didn't know either. When she left that day, she paused by the car, hesitated, then leaned forward as if to kiss him. For a heartbeat, he thought she would. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you for listening," and got in. As the car disappeared into the distance, he felt the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on him. He wiped his hands, stared at the floor, and told himself it was better this way. But when he closed the shop, he found himself looking down the empty road again, wishing for headlights that wouldn't come. He didn't realize it yet, but the moment he started waiting, everything in his life had already begun to change. The weeks that followed blurred together, each one marked by the quiet rhythm of stolen hours and words they shouldn't have spoken. Claire began showing up after sunset now, when the garage lights glowed against the empty lot. Ethan stopped pretending it was about the car. They both knew why she came. One night, she arrived trembling, saying she couldn't stay home anymore. Her husband's infidelity was no longer rumor. It was proof she had seen with her own eyes. She told Ethan she felt invisible, like a shadow that moved through rooms no one noticed. He reached for her hand, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, full of the things they'd been trying to ignore. When she leaned against him, her voice cracked as she said she was tired of pretending. He didn't think, didn't plan. He just let himself care. What began as comfort became something neither of them could define. She started spending more time at the garage, helping him with small things, laughing more freely, asking questions about his life, as though she wanted to memorize it. At night, they'd sit together and talk about futures that didn't exist yet, her dreaming of freedom, him imagining what it would mean to be loved without fear of loss. For a while, it felt real, and that illusion was enough to keep them both alive. But guilt has a way of finding cracks in happiness. Ethan started waking up in the middle of the night, replaying her words, wondering who he was becoming. He told himself that love wasn't supposed to begin with betrayal, yet he couldn't let her go. She had become part of his days, part of the quiet space he once guarded so tightly. Then the world outside their small corner intruded. Richard, her husband, had found out. Claire's phone had been tracked, her visits traced. One morning, a man in a suit showed up at the shop with a warning. He said the affair was known, and if Ethan valued his business, he'd stay away from Claire. The message was clear. Richard had power, and Ethan was nothing but a name on a lawsuit waiting to happen. The man left a paper on the counter, listing damages for defamation and interference. Ethan stared at it, feeling the ground fall away beneath him. For the first time, he realized how fragile everything he'd built really was. When Claire arrived later, he confronted her with the truth. She broke down, saying she never meant for him to be dragged into her mess. She had confronted her husband, told him she wanted to leave, and he had retaliated by destroying anything connected to her. Her accounts were frozen, her reputation ruined. She said she didn't care about any of that, only that Ethan believed she hadn't used him. He believed her, but it didn't make the pain easier. "You were never the problem," he said, voice low. "It's just that love shouldn't have to hide." She wept quietly, knowing there was no way back. That night was their last together. She told him she was leaving town to end things properly, to rebuild whatever life she could.
He didn't ask her to stay.
He just said, "Do it right this time. For you." Days passed, and word spread quickly in the small town.
Customers stopped coming by.
Some out of gossip, others out of judgment. Ethan worked harder, longer, trying to lose himself in the noise of machines, but everything reminded him of her. The scent of rain on metal, the faint trace of her perfume in the office chair she used. Then came the final blow. His mother's health worsened. Nights became hospital visits, mornings became bills and exhaustion. He sold tools to pay for medicine, worked alone in the dark, and felt the world closing in. One night she was gone. Her last words echoed through him. "Good hearts find their way." He didn't cry until after the funeral, when the house fell silent, and the only sound left was the ticking clock she used to wind by hand. In the weeks that followed, he almost closed the garage. It was too quiet without her laughter, too heavy without his mother's voice. But something inside refused to give up. He fixed every broken car that came through, not for money, but because fixing things was the only way he knew to survive. Each repair became a small act of defiance against everything that had been taken from him. He stopped checking his phone, stopped waiting for the black car that never came. Months turned into nearly a year, and the memory of her began to fade, not gone, but dulled like a scar that no longer hurts when touched. He learned to move again, to breathe without wondering if she was thinking of him. The town forgot the rumors, business returned slowly, and life began to settle into something steady. But every now and then, when rain hit the pavement just right, he'd look up, half expecting to see her reflection in the glass. He would remind himself that some people come into your life not to stay, but to remind you what love is supposed to feel like. The affair had broken him, but it had also stripped him bare enough to rebuild. He wasn't proud of what they'd done, but he couldn't call it a mistake either. It was real, in its own flawed way, two lonely people trying to hold on to something human in a world that had turned cold. She had walked away to reclaim her dignity. He had stayed behind to reclaim his peace. In the quiet that followed, he learned something his mother had always told him but he never understood. Some hearts break open just to let the light in. A year had passed since Ethan last saw Claire, a year measured not in months, but in the quiet routine of work and survival. The garage had changed. It was cleaner, busier, alive again. He had hired 2 young apprentices, boys who reminded him of himself when hope still felt reachable. Business was steady, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't living day to day. Yet peace had a strange emptiness to it. He moved through his days with calm precision, but at night, he still caught himself listening for the echo of a voice that wasn't coming back. He had accepted it as the cost of loving someone he was never meant to keep. Some debts, he realized, could only be repaid by learning to live better than before. One afternoon, while closing the books, he heard the low rumble of an engine that made him look up without knowing why. A familiar black SUV stopped outside. For a moment, he thought it was a trick of memory, a ghost his heart had conjured. But when the door opened and Claire stepped out, time folded in on itself. She looked different, simpler, grounded, no longer the woman wrapped in luxury and distance. Her hair was tied back, her clothes modest, her expression calm but searching. For a long time, neither spoke. When she finally did, her voice was steady. She said she'd been living quietly, that she had left her old life behind for good. Her divorce had been ugly, public, and freeing. "I thought I'd lost everything," she said, but maybe that was the point. Ethan didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to ask why she came, but the answer was in her eyes. She told him she'd started something new, a foundation to help small-town mechanics and family-run businesses, the kind that never got noticed. She wanted to give people like him a chance to grow, without losing themselves. She handed him a folder, explaining that one of her first investments had been in his garage, under a silent name. The new tools, the upgraded lifts, even the small grant that helped him hire staff, it had all been her. He stared at her, speechless, realizing she had never really disappeared. She had just found a better way to return. "You once told me I looked like I needed help without anyone asking for something back," she said softly. "You were right. I just didn't know how to give it then." He felt something inside him loosen, not like a wound reopening, but like a breath finally released. She hadn't come back to fix what was broken. She'd come back because they both finally were. He asked if she was happy. She smiled faintly, saying happiness was a work in progress. "But peace," she said, "that I've found." She looked around the garage, at the smell of oil and metal that used to make her flinch, but now seemed like home. He told her he never expected to see her again. "I didn't think I'd be the kind of woman who deserved to," she replied. They talked for a long while, not about the past, but about what had come after. She told him about long drives alone, learning how to cook for herself, learning how to live without being someone's possession. He told her about his apprentices, how teaching them made him remember who he wanted to be. Somewhere in the middle of that conversation, the heaviness of their history began to fade, replaced by something lighter: mutual respect, forgiveness, quiet understanding. There were no apologies left to make, only gratitude that they had both survived their own choices. As the sun dipped lower, she asked if there was still room in his life for someone who had once broken it. He hesitated, not because of doubt, but because the question deserved honesty. He told her that forgiveness wasn't a door that opened overnight. It was something built slowly, like trust, like love that had learned not to demand anything in return. "If you're asking whether I still care," he said, "I never stopped." She nodded, tears gathering but not falling. It wasn't dramatic, just real. Two people who had lived through fire and were finally ready to walk through the ashes together. She asked if he still believed in fixing things. He looked around at the garage, the symbol of everything he'd lost and rebuilt, and said, "Some things aren't meant to be fixed. They're meant to start over." She smiled, the kind of smile that carried no sadness this time. It was the same warmth he'd seen that first day in the rain, but softer, wiser. She said she didn't come for an answer, only to let him know that the person he'd once saved had finally learned how to save herself. He didn't stop her when she turned to leave, but before she reached the car, he called her name. She turned, and he said simply, "You don't have to go this time." She froze, then walked back, not fast, not slow, just certain. He didn't reach for her. She reached for him, taking his hand like it was something she'd been meant to do all along. No promises, no declarations, just presence. That was enough. The next morning, the town woke to find the garage open earlier than usual, music playing softly inside. People noticed how alive Ethan seemed, how his laugh had returned. Some whispered, some smiled knowingly, but he didn't care. Life had come full circle in the quietest way. Claire's car stayed parked out front, not as a symbol of escape, but of belonging. Time would go on, as it always does, and nothing about their story would be perfect. But it didn't need to be. They had learned that love isn't about rescuing or redeeming. It's about finding someone who sees you as you are and stays when the noise fades. Ethan had once fixed her car. Now, without realizing it, she had fixed his heart. And as the day stretched out before them, the sound of engines humming steady and sure, both of them understood that sometimes the best endings aren't grand or loud. They're simply the right kind of quiet.